We like to believe that we have mapped every corner of our planet, catalogued every leaf, and conquered every peak of the world. But when the sun dips below the horizon and the shadows of the deep forest stretch out, our ancient primal fears begin to stir. What if the giants of our past didn't actually disappear into the fossil record, but simply retreated into the silent, unreachable green corners? Deep in the Himalayas, stories persist of a creature that walks like a man but belongs to the frozen, unforgiving heights of the mountains. The Yeti, or the abominable snowman, is more than just a campfire story. It is a persistent mystery that has haunted humanity for centuries. From the Sherpa folklore of Tibet to the high-altitude expeditions of Western explorers, the footprints in the snow suggest something massive and unknown. To understand the Yeti, we must first understand why our brains are so deeply wired to see monsters in the dark and the distance. We are a species of storytellers, and our myths often serve as a bridge between the known world and the terrifyingly vast unknown wilderness. Throughout history, people living on the edges of the wild have reported encounters with wild men that blur the line between human and animal. These accounts aren't just modern tabloids, they are etched into the cultural DNA of the Himalayas, appearing in ancient art and religious rituals. In 1951, explorer Eric Shipton photographed a series of large primate-like footprints at 6,000 meters, sparking a global obsession with the hidden beast. The world watched in wonder as scientists and adventurers scrambled to find a creature that shouldn't exist in the thin, oxygen-poor air of the peaks. For decades, biological samples like hair, skin, and bone fragments were collected from remote monasteries labeled as relics of the elusive Great Snowman. These physical traces gave the legend a weight of reality, transforming a mountain ghost into a tangible target for modern scientific investigation and study. If a massive bipedal primate were roaming the mountains, it would challenge everything we know about the limits of mammalian biology and high-altitude survival. To solve the riddle, we have to look past the grainy photographs and dive into the microscopic world of DNA and evolutionary genetic sequences. Modern genetics is the ultimate detective, capable of pulling the truth from a single strand of hair found clinging to a jagged mountain rock. Dr. Charlotte Lindquist and her team recently conducted the most comprehensive DNA study of purported Yeti samples to see what they truly represent. By comparing these mysterious samples to the known branches of the Tree of Life, we can finally begin to strip away the myth. The results of these studies take us on a journey through time, revealing a story much older and more complex than a simple monster. When the DNA results finally came back from the lab, the answer wasn't a monster, but it was arguably even more spectacular. Out of 9 samples tested by the researchers, 8 belonged to local bear species, specifically the Asian black and Himalayan brown bears. To the untrained eye, a massive bear standing on its hind legs in a snowstorm looks terrifyingly like a shaggy, giant human. But the 9th sample was a mystery. It pointed to an ancient lineage of polar bear that lived tens of thousands of years ago. This suggests that the legend of the Yeti might be a distorted memory of a real, prehistoric animal that once roamed the high peaks. Science often works this way, trading a supernatural ghost for a biological wonder that is grounded in the reality of evolution. But even if the monster is just a bear, it doesn't explain the psychological grip these legends have on our collective human consciousness. Why do we keep searching for Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest or the Mapinguari in the dense, humid heart of the Amazon? Our world is shrinking, covered by satellites and constant surveillance. Yet we crave the idea that something can still remain hidden. This is the god of the gaps for biology. As long as there is an unexplored valley, we will fill it with our monsters. Psychologists suggest that these creatures are avatars for our relationship with nature, representing a wildness we have lost but still fear. In the Amazon, the legend of the Mapinguari describes a giant, stinking beast with a mouth in its belly and a single eye. While that sounds like pure fantasy, paleontologists have a different theory. It sounds remarkably like the extinct giant ground sloth. These massive creatures, some as large as elephants, officially went extinct about 10,000 years ago, just as humans arrived in the region. Is it possible that the memory of a real animal was passed down through oral traditions for 500 generations, becoming a monster? This phenomenon is known as folk paleontology, where cultural stories preserve the echoes of animals that science says are long gone. It suggests that our ancestors lived in a world much more crowded with giants than the one we inhabit today. But for every fossil-based explanation, there are thousands of sightings that science simply cannot verify or explain away with a skeleton. Most modern evidence for hidden species today comes in the form of shaky videos, blurry photographs, and unverifiable social media posts. To a scientist, a blurry photo isn't evidence, it is a lack of data, a signal lost in the noise of a digital age. If these creatures are real, they must obey the same laws of physics and biology that govern every other living thing on Earth. A population of large mammals requires a massive amount of calories, a stable breeding pool, and a vast undisturbed territory to survive. For a species like the Yeti or Bigfoot to exist, there would need to be hundreds, if not thousands of individuals to prevent extinction. Ecologists use environmental DNA or eDNA to sample water and soil, looking for the genetic footprints of animals that pass by. We can now detect a single fish in a vast lake or a rare leopard in a mountain range just by analyzing a cup of water. So far, these high-tech genetic dragnets have come up empty for any unknown primate DNA in the regions where they are most sighted. Instead of monsters, we find the genetic signatures of deer, squirrels, hikers, and the very bears that DNA testing identified earlier. But why do so many people, often credible, sober witnesses, insist they have seen something that science says isn't there? The answer lies in the way our eyes and brains cooperate to make sense of a world that is often chaotic and poorly lit. Our brains are pattern-matching machines, evolved to find faces in the clouds and predators in the rustling leaves of the forest. This is called pareidolia, a survival mechanism that kept our ancestors alive by assuming a shadow was a lion rather than a rock. In the deep woods, a vertical tree stump or a specific arrangement of branches can, for a split second, look exactly like a standing figure. Add a dash of adrenaline and a heart-pounding fear of the dark, and your brain fills in the blanks with the monster you expect. Once a legend takes root in a culture, it becomes a filter through which we interpret every strange sound or snapped twig in the night. There is also the expectation bias, where we are more likely to see what we are already looking for, even if it's not there. If you go into the mountains looking for a Yeti, every low growl of a bear becomes the voice of a hidden humanoid giant. Yet, science remains open to the possibility of Lazarus taxa species that disappear from the fossil record only to reappear alive later. The coelacanth, a prehistoric fish thought to be extinct for 66 million years, was found swimming happily off the coast of South Africa. If a giant fish can hide in the vastness of the ocean, could a giant ape hide in the vertical wilderness of the Himalayas? The difference is the environment. The deep ocean is a world of darkness and pressure, while the land is under our constant watch. Even as we debunk individual sightings, the lost megafauna hypothesis remains one of the most romantic ideas in modern biology. In 2003, on the island of Flores, scientists discovered the remains of a tiny human relative nicknamed the Hobbit, or Homo floresiensis. These small hominids lived alongside modern humans until relatively recently, and local legend spoke of Ebu Gogo, small, hairy, forest people. This was a seismic shift for science. It proved that our ancestors weren't the only intelligent primates walking the earth in the recent past. If a 3-foot-tall human relative could hide on a small island for thousands of years, what else could be hiding in larger wildernesses? The Gigantopithecus, the largest primate to ever live, stood nearly 10 feet tall and weighed over half a ton before vanishing. While the fossil record says they went extinct 300,000 years ago, enthusiasts argue they could have survived in isolated pocket environments. However, the isolation argument faces a harsh reality. Large animals leave large footprints, both literally and ecologically, on their environment. A creature of that size would need to consume hundreds of pounds of bamboo or fruit every single day to maintain its mass. We would see the broken branches, the massive amounts of waste, and the impact on local prey or plant populations quite clearly. Yet, the absence of evidence is not always the evidence of absence, a mantra that keeps cryptozoologists searching against the odds. Our obsession with hidden species reveals a deeper, more existential truth about the human condition and our need for wonder. We have paved the world, replaced the stars with streetlights, and turned the terrifying great unknown into a series of predictable suburbs. The Yeti and Bigfoot represent the last stand of the wild, the idea that nature is still bigger, stranger, and more powerful than us. If we find every creature and map every valley, we lose the magic of the horizon and the mystery of the dark. Evolution has spent billions of years creating a tapestry of life so complex that we are still only beginning to understand it. Every year, we discover thousands of new species, from tiny, colorful frogs to deep-sea worms that look like they belong on Mars. While most of these aren't giant apes, they remind us that the Earth still holds secrets that our current technology cannot yet see. Perhaps the monsters we seek are actually mirrors, reflecting our own desire to remain connected to the wild world of our ancestors. As we peer into the dense thickets of the world's remaining forests, we aren't just looking for animals, we are looking for ourselves. As we reach the limits of our maps, we find that the most important thing about the Yeti isn't whether it breathes. Its true power lies in the way it forces us to look at the world with a sense of humility and cautious expectation. Perhaps the reason we haven't found a body is that the Yeti doesn't live in the mountains, but in the gaps of our knowledge. Science is not a killer of mystery. It is a tool that allows us to find even greater wonders hidden behind the simple ones. When we trade a shaggy monster for a prehistoric bear that survived the Ice Age, the world doesn't become less interesting. It becomes a place of deep time, where the echoes of ancient lineages still walk among us in the high, cold air. We are part of a planet that is ancient, resilient, and still very much capable of surprising its most dominant inhabitant. The search for hidden species is ultimately a search for a version of Earth where humans aren't the only ones in charge. It is a plea for the wild to remain wild, and for the shadows to keep some of their secrets from our prying eyes. Every footprint in the snow, whether from a bear or a ghost, is a reminder that we are small in a very big universe. In the end, it may not matter if we ever find the definitive proof that the world's monster hunters are looking for. The hunt itself keeps the forest alive in our minds, protecting the very environments these creatures are said to inhabit. If believing in Bigfoot helps us save the last old-growth forests, then the legend has served a vital biological purpose. We live in a brief flicker of geological time, a momentary pulse in the 4 billion-year history of life on this rock. Our task is to remain curious, to keep asking, what if? And to never stop looking into the dark with wide, hopeful eyes. Because a world without monsters would be a world where we have finally, and tragically, finished exploring everything. And that would be the most frightening thing of all, to be truly alone in a world that we have completely understood. So, the next time you hear a strange branch snap or see a shadow move where it shouldn't, don't be so quick to turn on the light. Let the mystery linger for a moment longer, and remember that there is still room for the unknown in our magnificent, shrinking world. What else is out there, waiting in the silence, watching us from the edge of the trees as we look back into the dark?